and read Spanish, you know that sounds carry meaning, and that simple changes in those sounds can make a very different meaning. I give an example like hat versus hot. Those two words are quite different, but there's only one phoneme difference in those two words. And it's really important to think about that. So when you speak another language, you already know that this awareness of phonemic power can make these changes. So when you learn English, it's not so very difficult because you're just learning a new system. You don't have to learn that changes in sounds mean changes in meaning. But what happens when you do speak a first language, children, when certain phonemes are no longer used in L1 and they are pruned from the repertoire. I give an example of the short I in English, like it. It is not a sound that's used in Spanish. And so that's a difficult sound for you and for your students because it's been pruned from your vast array of sounds that are possible for you. It seems that infants have the ability to make all the sounds that exist in the human voice, but slowly we begin to lose some of those abilities to produce those sounds because they're not valued within the particular first language. And then a corollary, of course, is that certain sounds in English are not part of the Spanish sound system, right? So that's phonemic awareness. It's an interesting phenomenon because it's really important for those children who are first learning to read, be it in Spanish or in English. And once you know it, you actually recognize that sounds carry meaning, even simple sounds. So phonics, what is that? And what are the benefits and what are the challenges of phonics? Phonics is the predictable relationship between phonemes and graphemes. The predictable relationship between phonemes and graphemes. How about a comment from somebody about the difference between Spanish phonics, or the predictable relationship between phonemes and graphics in Spanish versus English? How about
in the chat, or
no, orally? If you could do it orally. How about this young one with the hat and the gray T-shirt? Can you do it? You have the white hat and the gray T-shirt. What's her name, Miguel?
I'm not seeing everybody.
Oh, okay.
Because I have the screen here, but
hello.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, my name is Luciano.
Hi, Luciano.
I think that you are referring to this position between phonetic language and a non-phonetic language, which is that how can I say, like a grapheme, a letter, is always pronounced the same way as it is written, as in Spanish. Like there are very few exceptions, but in English it's totally different because one grapheme in one particular way, in one particular order, will sound differently. And not only that, in different sentences, if it's a verb, if it's a noun, it might also sound different.
Exactly. Exactly the point I was trying to get at. The transparency of Spanish and its grapheme state, that there's a much more predictable relationship between Spanish, oral Spanish language, and written Spanish language, unlike English, which is very opaque, and the relationship is not as clear. Thank you for responding to that. Phonics also is a method of teaching reading that stresses the acquisition of letter and sound correspondence and how we use it in spelling and reading. So I think you probably realize that learning to read in English is much more difficult than learning to read in Spanish because of the lack of predictability of the English language. We certainly do have predictability, but it's not as predictable as Spanish. So let me go on. Okay, the benefits of phonics. Now, once a reader already has learned a decoding system, as all your students have, you only need to learn the new one, that it's in English. So it's not that complicated, but of course, it refers to the problem, of course, is the relationship of the phonemes to the graphemes. And that's characterized by the orthographic depth hypothesis, how closely aligned the oral language is to the written language. So how deep is the relationship between oral and written language? Certainly English has a much deeper grapheme system than Spanish does. And languages like Italian, Korean, which was the easy Korean, Hangul, are very user-friendly and quite transparent. But other languages, like you can think the far end of the spectrum, a language like Chinese, where it's really deep graphic system, where icons are used rather than an alphabet. But it's very interesting to see the range of transparency between the phonemic system and the graphemic system in languages that have alphabets. So for those who have learned to read in Spanish, it's not so difficult to learn to read in English because you already know the system. You only have to be aware of the interference that you might get from Spanish. And this is the transfer of Spanish sound system is a challenge that you have. And we all know that you would have a tendency to use the pronunciation system in Spanish when reading or pronouncing in English. And in English, it's the lack of the sound symbol correspondence. Long vowels, sounds that are represented in multiple combinations, like say the word kite, K-I-T-E, and that's a long vowel, or ate, A-T-E. But the word see, S-E-A, and S-E-E are the same, so large numbers of homonyms. These are things that you certainly are aware of, and but they have to be present in your teaching of reading and in your own reading process. And the silent letters at the end, whereas Spanish tends to be fully pronounceable. In English, we have something like Kate, K-A-T-E, the name, and we don't say the final E. There are silent letters, or the word knee, K-N-E-E. And that's why some learners of English will say knee or knock rather than saying knock. So these are the challenges that we face in phonics, and they have to be addressed directly. Fluency, what is that? And what are the benefits for L2 and the challenges? This is interesting. It's the ability to recognize words quickly and accurately, and at the same time, construct meaning from connected text. What we describe fluency as is the bridge between word recognition, recognizing individual words, and the actual comprehension of a text. This is oral reading, and this is something you can do very fluently in Spanish, but it takes some work to do it in English. The benefits for doing it already, fluency is already in place in Spanish for you. You automatically recognize words with your long experience with reading. You use the correct rhythm and tone, the prosody. You have accuracy, and you do it with speed and with ease. You have the right expression when you read in Spanish and the right intonation and phrasing. This has to be learned in a new language, in English in this case. So it may be influenced by the students' poor decoding skills that may make their reading orally very challenging if they are using the wrong vowel system, for example, as they decode. Or we also need models for fluency in L2. And I would recommend that as you teach language and teach reading, that you model oral reading for your students so they can get a sense of how a skilled reader in English actually reads fluently. and you can show them how to chunk meaningful thoughts in your oral reading, and phrasing that may be somewhat different from Spanish. So that's really important. So I see fluency as really an important phenomenon, moving us from decoding skills to comprehension. Vocabulary, clearly that's at the heart of it. And many of you talked about vocabulary in your analysis of the Cinderella story. You use your vocabulary from first language, from Spanish, and to make sense of it, because there are a lot of cognates between Spanish and French. So what is vocabulary? It's a brief description is the words of the text, not a surprise, but it also is the word knowledge that you carry and related conceptual or world knowledge. Say you're talking about the concept of, we say long division in mathematics. If you know long division and you know that what that is in Spanish, how you divide large numbers by other large numbers, then the related words can be easily applied to that process. It's also world knowledge, knowledge of how things proceed in the world as we work in the world. So the benefits of being a Spanish reader is that you have conceptual knowledge from L1, and also when you're moving to English from Spanish, we have many common roots and from Latin, and those really are helpful for understanding. And many of you use those in the Cinderella passage, the common roots and words that were similar or had at least a basic root that was shared between the two words. And also the Latinate cognates with the academic language that's part of that. Words such as analysis and synthesis and other kinds of words that are really academic tend to be Latinate. Those words that are common tend to be Germanic and Old English. So that's an interesting phenomenon that we in English use the same Latinate cognates that you do in Spanish for more sophisticated language. So of course the false cognates, I always think of like the word actual, which is today, right? And it's not actual as it is in English, right? Or the classic embarazada, which has made many young English speaker turn red with embarrassment because she says estoy embarazada. And also the different prefixes and suffixes used in English in Spanish. For instance, caridad, the DAD for TY in Spanish. Those are certainly challenges, but they can be easily taught. And then the large numbers of common words that come from German and Old English. And those are the kind of, those are the kinds of words that are used in conversation primarily, but also tend to be the support words in texts. That even academic texts, they tend to be the support words. Like think of the word get, or become, or think about, those are all words that come from the Old English. And those are very, or do and does, right? And then in English, we also have many common words that have multiple meanings, like the word table. Table, it could be a table that you do your work on. It could be a multiplication table, a table that's a chart of some sort. It can be to table an issue, means to put it aside for the time being. So those kinds of simple words, and I think the chair can be a seat, but it can be the director of a department. It can be to oversee a meeting as well. So those multiple words, those multiple meanings of common words is a challenge for readers as well. So comprehension, that's the end goal of all this. And what about that? It's the ability to read text and understand its meaning. What I asked you to do at the beginning with the Cinderella passage. So Students who already read in Spanish have a greater conceptual knowledge, as we suggested, in vocabulary. They often have ideas about how texts function. So they have reading experiences that they bring to the task. They have strategies that you have strategies that you use in Spanish that you can bring to English, because texts are not so very different in the two languages. You also have greater linguistic knowledge, meta-linguistic knowledge about how language works. And we know that from the literature that those who are bilingual tend to have a greater meta-linguistic knowledge. They can understand that there's linguistic relativism that takes place as we name something as a ball or a pelota, a ballon, or whatever we want to call it in whatever language. Like a table is una mesa, teburu in Japanese, but we know when we speak two languages that it's an arbitrary assignment of a word or a sound to meaning. And I think that kind of meta-linguistic knowledge really helps us become better able to analyze language. And also metacognitive knowledge. I asked you at the beginning of this presentation to think about how you analyze the text of Cinderella. And what I wanted you to do was think about your thinking. I wanted you to kind of be aware of what you did and how you did it so that you could improve your strategies, which Dr. Farias was talking about earlier, that strategies is part of what you're focusing on right now as one of your three elements of your own language learning ability. And then, of course, discourse similarities. We have some discourse similarities across the two languages because we share a common rhetorical style. And I think Spanish and English have many consistencies across discourse. So the challenges of comprehension, however, is that structural differences at the word and sentence level. I was thinking about this, yo quiero que vengas. And it's a simple sentence, but if you say it in English, it's I want you to come. And so that kind of change, that's a structural one, but it's very basic. And things like that your students will make, mistakes that your students will make often with, a red house, una casa roja, that sort of difference in structure that can affect understanding. Reference markers, how you refer to previous the references and being able to go back to those references. Had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. Maybe you know that fairy tale, that rhyme. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. Its refers to the lamb. It's not complicated if you know it, but if you don't, you wouldn't understand that its fur or its hair is white as snow. Lack of knowledge of discourse markers, different discourse markers in Spanish and in English. A good example of this one was at the very beginning, that little reading I gave you, Il était une fois, once upon a time. That's what is once upon a time in French. And in English, it's once upon a time. And in Spanish, it's había una vez, right? And knowing that's the discourse marker that a fairy tale is coming. And it's really important to recognize that and to be explicit about it when you're teaching your children that kind of discourse marker, as well as more complicated ones like my main point is, or the principal argument is the following, recognizing that this is the most important piece of the text. And some suggest that we have different rhetorical patterns in English and in Spanish. And I think that's something that you might look into. There's a great deal of debate about it, but I think there is some different presentation style in the two languages, but I don't think they're overwhelming. I think they might be more, the differences might be greater when we're talking about languages that are farther removed, like English and Japanese, say, or something like that, or Chinese. And then, of course, cultural knowledge. And Dr. Farias mentioned that earlier, why you would have some difficulty learning something, and if the cultural knowledge is not in place. An important note that I wanted to make in this, at this moment, is the language threshold hypothesis. Some researchers say, second language reading researchers say that you need to have enough language, in enough L2, enough second language itself, before you're asked to read. So often we're asked to read very, very quickly. And if we're frustrated by the reading experience, as one of our classmates was, and she dropped out of the reading because it was too complicated for her. She didn't have enough language in French to be successful and to use her skills at reading. So finally, some teaching implications. I would suggest that as you teach, you use oral languages at every opportunity. Try to make oral language explicit for the learners and build on that oral language so that the students can read very well. Be explicit about sounds in English and the possible interference between Spanish and English as you start to learn the sounds. I'm sure you do that quite a bit, but to be explicit about it, especially as you see the problems in reading. Old pronunciations from Spanish still seem to be in place when students are reading, and they may misunderstand a word or an expression. Encourage your students to decode by analogy. Analogy is to use what you know about the language already, and when you see a new word that looks like an old word, you try to, a word that you're familiar with, try to use that old word to pronounce the new word. You know, theology, analogy. You know, and that's often a good way, and that's really how researchers say that we do really learn to decode words. So make good use of language knowledge in Spanish, because that's the basis of your literacy. And you know what they know in Spanish and the strategies they use in Spanish to read effectively. Make sure they apply those to English, because sometimes learners forget that they know how to read well in a first language. And then use graphic and or written models or outlines to improve comprehension. That's been shown to be quite effective. So with that, Dr. Farias asked me to be very, to just spend a short time talking about these areas. I'm sure each one of these topics could be addressed for a good half hour, and we could talk about them and interact about them, but that covers my formal presentation. So I'm certainly happy to take questions now.
Thank you, Paul. Just to remind students that one of the basic readings for this is the chapter by Grave or Grave, reading in a second language, where they can explore further these ideas in terms of these 5 points that you just mentioned, that are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, and the challenges behind each one of them, particularly with respect to their connection with Spanish. We have here a question, and it says, how can you tell when it is time for students to read in this new language? And this is connected to the last point that you just mentioned, the threshold hypothesis, that has to do with enough pool of the language to understand what you're reading, right?
Yes. That's a tricky question, because on the one hand, I do suggest that you focus a lot on oral language, but you don't want it to be to the detriment of written language, because the students will learn through both the oral and the written. So I would say just to be, if you really want the students to be able to apply their first language strategies, then you have to go really slowly. Make sure it's, and I have an answer. It's really the nature of the text that you ask the students to read. That's what it is. I was sort of coming to my answer as I was thinking. If you want students to read a complex text, then you want to make sure that they're prepared for it. You maybe introduce some key vocabulary, and you maybe do the modeling, as I suggested in fluency training, where you let them see how the text sounds orally. Maybe read the first paragraph and the last paragraph of Cinderella, say, in English. And then let them hear how it sounds. And then let them work with it a little bit. But if you really want them to apply their strategies, like you did with the Cinderella, you really have to make sure that they have enough knowledge of the language. Because we saw the one student who admitted that she didn't understand it. She just stopped because she didn't have enough language to continue on. So I think you want to make sure that students have a basic understanding of language before you start really forcing them to read complex texts.
Speaking of that basic understanding of language, there is a comment here with respect to that there are also words and expressions that have no direct equivalent in the two languages, and that is a challenge. And I think this takes us into the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis with respect to the idiosyncrasy of words and expressions in one language, and how that's very difficult to translate. Let me give you the example. You've visited Chile enough, maybe you know, but the concept of pituto or pitutear in Chile is so hard to translate to other languages without going like the long road to a long paraphrase. Or let me take the English word accountability it's seldom used, and sometimes it's just used in English because there is no equivalent into Spanish.
I agree, but I think in some ways we need to embrace that, and you, as the kind of the cultural and linguistic ambassadors of English, as you work with your learners, you want to show them what the meanings contain in English that you may not have in Spanish. You want to show them the richness of another language that expresses things in a different way, because that provides you with a different way of thinking and something that's richer. And, you know, I would say that I have many friends who are bilingual, and it's very interesting, and probably you know this too, Miguel, that sometimes we speak in Spanish and sometimes we speak in English, and sometimes certain words are so perfect in English that we use the English word, and sometimes the word is so perfect in Spanish that we'll use a Spanish word. So we code switch across those languages because of the way the particular language represents a concept, and it represents it so well. I'll give you an expression. There's an expression in French. Elle est une femme comme il faut. She's a woman comme il faut, as she must be. And it means, it's such an interesting expression. It means that she's a woman who is just a perfectly perfect woman. She does things well. She's just the right style of woman. And it's a great compliment to say to somebody, but we don't have any way to say it in English. There's just, we could say it as you were suggesting, Miguel, in a roundabout way, but we have no direct explanation of it because it's in the culture and in the language. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's that has to do. I just wanted to remind them because they're reading. In the reading, you mentioned bottom up and top down processes, and I just wanted to remind them that when they read the literature, some authors call them lower level processes and higher level processes.
Mhm.
That is bottom up, meaning reading from the text, decoding the words and grammar and syntax of the language, and top down, bringing background knowledge into the understanding of what I'm reading.
Let me share something that I have on my computer. It speaks to that issue. Let me see. What am I going to do? Share. Sorry.
That's okay.
I got to get the share button here. Coming.
There you are.
There I am. Take a look at that. Yeah, I can read it fine. I'm worried about my comprehension. What makes that funny?
Because he was misinterpreted when he said that he couldn't read.
Right. Because he's basically just naming the letters, and he's at the optometrist, right? And he's naming the letters, and there's nothing to comprehend really in that process. So there's kind of low-level skills of recognizing the letters and recognizing the sounds, and then a concept of the word, and then it moves to high-level comprehension. So it kind of captures that bottom-up and top-down skills, or lower-level and higher-level skills. You know, I think it's really important to remember that you and all of us as good, as skilled readers, come to the table with a great deal of knowledge that we can use as we read. So, I mean, you have strategies that the younger students you work with don't have. We have a lot of strategies that are in our backpack that we can use as we read a text. And I think it's important to remember that, and that speaks to the issue of how much language. If you ask students to read something that's really, really difficult, they'll probably be frustrated and probably give up if they don't feel that they can actually master something. So you want to support the students. Like if you're working with young students, you might want to support them and give them some visuals that go with the reading, you know? Is it Nicola Perez has a question? Nicole,
she made a comment recently. Yes.
oh, she made a comment. Okay.
Yes.
How can you tell us how to read in the new language? Somewhat.
I have a question with respect to, have you seen the reading process evolving in time? Like when you started to read, when then you became a reader, and have you encountered that you're reading different kinds of text now than before? Like, for example, this reading that we're doing now, like we're taking a look at the chat at the same time that we're taking a look at the PowerPoint. It's very dynamic and quick reading that is different from when we sit and read from the print.
Oh, that's an interesting observation, and it's really true. And we have to read very quickly too, as you suggest, right? So I think things are changing because of online reading too, you know, and people read many different forms, you know, whether it's WhatsApp or Instagram or FaceTime or you know, and they just have it, or Zoom chats. So Catalina has a question, I see.
Yes.
You want to
Yes.
pose it?
I have a question. Do you recommend to teach other languages to children when they're at the meantime learning their own language? For example, a young girl from here, Chile, is 5 years old, and she's still learning Spanish. Is it recommended to start teaching another language, for example, English?
I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's actually, we know from the literature that the children actually can get access to those sounds. Remember I talked about the sounds that are pruned from your speech when you're young, because they're not used in your environment. Little young children can produce those sounds quite readily. I think one of the recommendations that the literature has is that the speaker of the language, say you have the English speaker working with the child, that they continually use English and the other speaker uses Spanish. So the student can identify two distinct sources of language. That's really what the literature shows us. And a child can learn another language from the grandparents or the caretaker. And there's a great flexibility for young children. And I don't think there's any problem of interference. It's very minor at best, any interference from first language or on first language when they learn a second language. Very little interference.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question because we don't want to abuse of your time, Paul. And this is a question from Allison. Allison?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Well, I have a question about kids or children that already knew two languages, like, for example, children of immigrants, like they speak their native language and then the language of the country they're in, and then they learn a third language in the school. Like, are they better at decoding the third language because they already know two, or that doesn't happen?
It seems that children who actually, as I said earlier, it's this ability to know that a concept is quite arbitrary, to name something pelota or ball, it's arbitrary. The name is arbitrary for the user of the language. Knowing that really provides a cognitive flexibility among second language learners. And a lot of the literature shows that a child who knows two languages learns the third language quite readily. And there's kind of an ability to learn that quickly. And you're worried about interference, maybe?
Yeah, because sometimes you are already confused with two languages, and even a third is like even a challenge, I think.
Yeah, they sort of fall into place. I mean, I imagine that child will speak a certain language at home. They'll speak a certain language in school all day, most of the day, and then they take their English class. So they're kind of compartmentalized. So I think that it can be very effective because they don't really cross over that much, the three languages, if different people are the source of the language, And there's no problem, of course, at home. And then they're learning Spanish normally. And there may be some interference, but it's probably negligible. And probably in the long run, the better outcome is being trilingual, at the end of the day when they become adults, to have those three languages, right? Their native language, Spanish and English, probably in this case, right?
Thank you.
Good question.
Yes, these are very, very good questions. And some of them, like this last one, deal with a dimension that we haven't touched much here, that is the social dimension in reading. That is, what is the purpose of reading? And the other is, what is the status of the language, the new language that you're learning to read in? A case here is the introduction of English in indigenous communities, let's say the Mapuche community, because the national curriculum requires English to be taught in all schools. So those children come with Mapudungun, then they are learning Spanish, and on top of that, they are obligated for the curriculum to learn English. Some people say that they need to wait a little bit before the other two languages are consolidated until they learn the third one, and they have no clarity with respect to, so what is it that I'm learning English for?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a bit of an issue, and we've dealt with it in the U.S. because we have a lot of immigrants who have come, and they are trying to learn English, and to have them take up another language, say our principal language in the U.S. is Spanish. That's our principal second language, or maybe French. And to have them learn one of those is probably not as valuable as solidifying their English ability. So, I mean, it's the same phenomenon in Chile, where you have the students trying to solidify their Spanish, you know, and they really need to do that. So I guess waiting a little bit is worthwhile,
Mhm.
you know, for instruction.
Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Abraham, for your time. This session is going to be recorded. I think I missed the first two slides, but I'm going to ask you later to please send me the PowerPoint so that I can load it up into Moodle, please,
Sure.
for the students to have that presentation, and they're going to have this session recorded. And then I'm gonna link it to Moodle too. Thank you very much. And
Welcome. I want to wish
yes,
you all very good luck with your work. These are difficult times for everybody in the world, and I'm glad that you're continuing on with your studies. It's a good time to focus on your studies and keep that focus going during these very hard times. So I wish you the best, and I hope that you continue to think a lot about language learning and reading, and I hope that some of the ideas that I addressed today will inspire you as you look at your own profile as a reader. So lots of good luck, and a pleasure meeting you, and maybe one day I'll see you in person, okay? Not
thank
on Zoom.
you.
Okay,
Thank you.
ciao.
And
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
just
Okay,
just
Thank
for
you
all
so
of
much
you,
for your
we're
time.
going to meet on Thursday for a quick session on questions. Okay? I'll see you Thursday. Bye-bye.
bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.